There are so many distinctive things that people remember from the horror genre, such as Frankenstein screaming, "It's alive!", Dracula rising from his coffin, Leatherface branding a chainsaw, or Busta Rhymes putting a kung fu beating on Michael Myers, though I wish I could forget that one. However, there are also lots of things some horror fans remember that didn't actually happen, or at least not in the way that many remember them to have happened. So with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie facts that aren't actually true. Number 10. Frankenstein had an assistant called Igor. 1931's Frankenstein is so ingrained in pop culture, everyone knows the story of Dr. Victor Frankenstein and his hunchbacked assistant Igor as their reanimated creature grows violent and leads to the townspeople hunting it down. The only problem there, though, is that Frankenstein's assistant is called Fritz, not Igor. Even though he's been called Igor in other adaptations and literally had his own Igor movie, there is no such character in James Whale's 1931 film. Igor, spelt with a Y, is a completely different character who debuted in the second sequel, Son of Frankenstein, an insane blacksmith played by Bela Lugosi and who manipulates the monster to kill on his behalf. Part of the blame for this confusion is probably Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, which featured a hunchback called Igor due to one bulbous eye, leading to some thinking the hunchback of the first Frankenstein was indeed named Igor. Number 9. The original Wolfman turned into a werewolf during a full moon. 1941's The Wolfman revolves around Lawrence Talbot, who gradually turns into a werewolf. Of course, this film spawned numerous sequels, remakes, crossovers, and popularized the werewolf mythos. However, there are a few misconceptions about this film, notably that this was not the first werewolf movie, for that was 1913's The Werewolf, although the last copy of that was destroyed in 1924. More importantly, The Wolfman doesn't feature any scenes where Talbot transforms under a full moon. In fact, the film doesn't even have a shot of a full moon. Instead, we're told that Lawrence Talbot transforms when the autumn moon is bright, with the sequels changing this to when the moon is full and bright. Number 8. Godzilla survived the events of the first movie. The king of the monsters, Godzilla has gone toe-to-toe with absolutely everything over the decades, from the army to other monsters, to dinosaurs, to aliens, to robots, to mutated flowers, and even clones of himself. From all of Big G's outings though, the original 1954 film is considered one of the very best, as the Japanese government frantically scrambled to stop Godzilla's attack on Tokyo. Considering how Godzilla went on to appear in dozens of movies, many presume the Japanese were unsuccessful in their attempts to take down the creature. However, the original film ends with a giant lizard shredded down to a skeleton due to an oxygen destroyer. Of course, realizing that they had something special on their hands, Toho opted to deliver a sequel just 9 months later, meaning the Godzilla of the first movie is technically a completely different creature to the one who appears in the rest of the series. Number 7. Jason Voorhees always wore a hockey mask. When you think of Jason Voorhees, you tend to think of Camp Crystal Lake, a machete, and his famed hockey mask. While Friday the 13th diehards will be well aware of this fact, more casual horror fans may be surprised to realize that Jason didn't always wear the hockey mask. In fact, it wasn't until Friday the 13th Part 3 that Jason got his trademark look. Obviously, he was just shown as a young boy in the first movie, but the second Friday the 13th had the adult Jason cracking skulls as he wore a burlap sack over his head. From a story standpoint, Jason took the hockey mask from Shelley Finkelstein after killing that opinion-splitting character in Friday the 13th Part 3. In reality, special effects supervisor Marty J. Sadoff had his hockey gear with him on set and tried the mask out on Jason, and with that, magic was created. Number 6. The main villain in Hellraiser is named Pinhead. Furious at how the movie adaptation of his Rawhead Rex turned out, it's really bad. Clive Barker was very much hands-on when his Hellbound Heart received the big screen treatment 1 year later, directing the film himself. For the tale, Barker had created his most iconic character, an extra-dimensional entity powered by hell and gleefully obsessed by torture. The problem was, everyone gets the character's name wrong. Credited as the lead Cenobite, viewers didn't know what to call this eerie figure, since their name is never spoken in the movie. So, due to their skull being covered in nails, fans started to call the character Pinhead, which Clive Barker absolutely detested and called undignified. Hellraiser 3 was the first time the character was called Pinhead on screen, and by that point, Clive Barker had given up and just let viewers use whatever name they wanted to. Number 5. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on a true story. Any horror fan worth their salt knows the story of Tobe Hooper's legendary Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A bunch of young adults run afoul of the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface and his cannibalistic family, with poor Sally Hardesty left as the sole survivor. Well, until the 2022 movie decided to bring Sally back just to kill her off, but the less said about that dumpster fire, the better. Anyway, adding to the initial terror around that first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, the marketing promised that these horrors were based on a true story, with whispers that the events of the film were based on grisly murders that took place in Puff, near San Antonio, Texas. Of course, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not based on a true story, and the only semblance of truth here is that Leatherface is very, very loosely based on the infamous Ed Gein, who wore masks made of human faces and decorated his house with human body parts, though Gein wasn't a cannibal and didn't murder his victims with a chainsaw, so he's kind of got that going for him at least. Number 4. Alfred Hitchcock was a horror director. When looking at the greatest horror directors of all time, some will suggest the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. While yes, Hitchcock has 2 stunning horror films in Psycho and The Birds, he spent over half a century mastering psychological thrillers such as Strangers on a Train, Vertigo, A Shadow of Doubt, Rope, North by Northwest, Lifeboat, Dial M for Murder, and Rear Window. Imagine if Steven Spielberg was lazily labeled a horror director solely because of Jaws and Jurassic Park. While those movies would indeed be classed as horrors, and very, very good ones, they only make up a tiny, tiny part of Spielberg's diverse resume. Number 3. The Blair Witch Project was the first found footage horror film. For those of us around at the time, it's hard to fully explain just how big a deal the Blair Witch Project was, with the burgeoning days of the internet genuinely making you believe that this could somehow be real footage, because why would anything on the internet be untrue, of course? Made for an initial $60,000 and raking in nearly $250 million, this was an absolute game changer, popularizing found footage horror, and in fact often being quoted as the first ever found footage horror movie. In actuality, the first found footage horror was 1980's Cannibal Holocaust, which was styled as footage of a film crew shooting a documentary about a tribe of Amazonian cannibals, and is a movie with such grim visuals we likely can't show any of them here. And so real was Cannibal Holocaust presented as, director Ruggero Deodato was actually brought to court for murder, forcing the actors to show up in court to reveal that, they weren't actually dead. Number 2. Boris Karloff's mummy was covered in bandages. Away from Frankenstein's monster, the iconic Boris Karloff's other most famous role was that of the title character in 1932's The Mummy. This wasn't the first mummy movie, but it did popularize the idea of resurrecting a mummified corpse as a deadly supernatural force, spawning a whole subgenre of mummy films. However, Karloff's mummy is often mistaken as the classic bandages-wearing figure. Instead, this version wears normal clothes and a fez, isn't some sort of mindless, shuffling zombie, and is actually intelligent, articulate, and calculated. The first film to feature the classic killer mummy draped in bandages didn't actually arrive until 8 years later, that'd be The Mummy's Hand, with subsequent mummy movies often copying that particular look. Number 1. Everything about Bela Lugosi's Dracula. Of all the depictions of Dracula over the years, Bela Lugosi is likely most synonymous with that vampiric role, bringing hypnotic powers, unblinking eyes, a calm demeanor, and of course a vulnerability to crosses and wooden stakes. However, there are many classic Dracula tropes that don't apply in the 1931 movie, as Dracula never displays fangs or transforms into a bat, and it wasn't until 1948 Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein that Lugosi's vampire showed those transformation powers. The 1931 film also isn't the first Dracula movie, nor the first vampire movie, period, with Vampire of the Coast in 1909, the first vampire film, and 1921's Dracula's Death, the first to depict the Transylvanian Count.